Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and today I'm going to be reading again from Final Fantasy and Philosophy. Today we're going to be doing Chapter 10, Kupo for Karl and the Materialist Conception of History, by Michel S. Beaulieu. Vivi Oranisha begins Final Fantasy IX as a nameless kid in the town of Alexandria. As he wanders around trying to figure out who he is and what he needs to do next, you discover that a theatrical troupe is in town and you have a ticket for their show. Though the ticket turns out to be a fake, you meet Rat Kid, who asks you for help with a ladder. Like most of the townspeople, Rat Kid will watch the show from the rooftops. As you follow Rat Kid, you read a sign in a side alley that says, Proletariat Patrons Movement. You naturally wonder, who are the proletariat? But the game doesn't answer this question directly. So we need a little help from our philosopher friends. The job system and class consciousness. Oh my god, I fucking love it. The proletariat is a term most often associated with the writings of Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883. Who predicted a movement in history that would lead to the breakdown of capitalism and the establishment of a communist society, basically one in which class-based conflict would no longer exist. This final transformation of society comes near the end of a series of historical epochs: tribalism, primitive communism, feudalism, capitalism, and then communism. The defining character of which is determined by the clash between those who control the means of production and those who don't. At a certain point in each stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into conflict with the existing relations of production, and an era of social revolution begins. Consider Marx's most famous statement: "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle." This means that society and history are understandable as a struggle between two classes: the proletarians, those who sell their labor, and the bourgeoisie, those who have wealth. Power in this struggle rests with the capitalists, another term for those who hold the wealth. Over time, however, the balance shifts as proletarians become aware of their oppression and find common cause with one another to advance their position. The same holds true for the bourgeoisie, who will form alliances to protect their interest. The coming together will eventually develop class consciousness, in which a group acting as one produces real historical change. Returning to the world of Final Fantasy IX, the proletariat patrons would be the class of citizens in Alexandria who must sit on rooftops and crowd into the narrow areas to view the entertainment that the upper classes enjoy. The poster implies a certain level of resentment, a very public display of class tension. In fact, we see such class tension throughout the worlds of Final Fantasy. Steiner and other members of the elite have a clear disdain for those who are not a part of their class. Despite being one of the heroes in the moment in the city of Trino, Steiner blames the oppressed for their lawless ways. In Final Fantasy VII, Avalanche, largely composed of elements from the laboring lower segments of Midgar, opposes Shinra, and Shinra's leadership clearly has disdain for its laborers, going so far as to drop the plate on Sector 7, killing the entire population in an attempt to suppress any opposition. The introduction of the job system in Final Fantasy III reinforces the class-based nature of the societies our heroes inhabit. Classes of characters are introduced, each with its own attributes and status. Though the previous games clearly had classes, Final Fantasy III allows us to be much more active in creating a customizable class-based society. This would be another level of, signifiers. From the lens of the reading on the spiky-haired protagonist. We do not merely partake passively in such a society, rather we reinforce our class prejudices. As a fan of mages, I tend to treat them as the better class. Knights, on the other hand, I treat much like thieves, laborers who get the job done but not the leaders. The low classes, Moogles, are also introduced for the first time in Final Fantasy III. More on them later. As Marx saw it, the history is the story of the development of human productive power. In the preface to a contribution to the critique of political economy, he said, "It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness." The materialist conception of history suggests that human activity, rather than thought, shapes history. For example, in Final Fantasy XII, Van's position within the Rabanstrian society is defined by both his relationship to the merchants of the city, by extension, the Rabastrian relationship with the Imperials. As a careful listener tells Van, anything, including moving back into the city from Lowtown, is possible with money. Van's activities, like most of the heroes in the Final Fantasy series, are dependent on making gil. He does not choose the hunts, set the price of goods, or even set the standards for the licenses he must accumulate. Yet his actions shape society and alter his relationship and social standing. Early in the game, the caravans from Dalmasca Easterstand or Dalmasca Westerstand, on which the supplies for the city depend, will, if one believes the people whom Van talks to, ultimately end if someone, Van, does not defeat the fiends blocking them. Fiends or Feuerbach. In many respects, the act of playing Final Fantasy is an agreement that your characters can take action to change their individual status and the nature of society, is in keeping with the Marxist conception of history. In his Theses on Feuerbach, Marx argues that the philosophers have only inherited the world in various ways. The point is to change it. He added, however, that men make their own history, but they do not make it for themselves as they please. But they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, or transmitted from the past. Why should the Light Warriors in Final Fantasy I battle the Fiends if the outcome will have no effect on society? In Final Fantasy IV, wait, what? Yeah, that definitely says Final Fantasy IV. This is absolutely a typo. In that's 6. Still a typo. Why should Cloud take on Shinra if their quasi-world government is not going to end? Even Yuna's physical leveling up and philosophical coming to grips with their impending death preparation in Final Fantasy X to take on Sen, the embodiment of the ultimate rejection of an industrial and capitalist world, can be accomplished only through action. Only by actively changing the world can the social and philosophical problems our heroes face be changed. On the surface, while each Final Fantasy series is unique, each game in the Final Fantasy series is unique and, aside from the rare sequel, its own self-contained plot. The stories and the histories they often develop or reveal are in keeping with this concept. Typically, heroes face a quest of some sort in a world wrought by an uprising or rebellion against an economic, political, or religious power. Bent on maintaining its control over the world, sometimes with the desire to destroy it, this power works to preserve its rules and views of how society should be structured and run. The player is often thrust into the action controlling a character or group of characters who band together in common cause and struggle against oppression. Every game essentially reaches a climax in which the main protagonist faces off against the main antagonist and the victory is achieved in some form. Notice that this change does not have to be positive. In fact, if one assumes the Marxist position that society will undergo a number of changes before reaching a utopian existence, then it stands to reason that reasons of hardship will be necessary for progress. The end of Final Fantasy VII, for example, is not entirely the positive experience gamers may have hoped for. Eris, after all, is killed and Midgar largely destroyed. Similarly, at the end of Final Fantasy X, change has occurred when sin is banished for good, but it is unclear whether this is a positive development. Champion of the Sewers aspires to noble action. For some of the games in the series, Marx's ultimate social change, communism, is not even possible. As in Marx's feudal stage of development, the political nature of many of the games is defined by the economic relationship between kings and nobility and villages and peasants. Often, members of both of these segments of society partake in the quest, so it is only natural that most of the games in the series do not seek to dramatically alter the political, social, or even religious status quo. Instead, they seek to replace it with something similar but more just. These endings, though, often speak to an opportunity to move beyond. For example, although the four warriors of light in the original Final Fantasy seek to dramatically change the overall structure of society in which they live, at the end of the game, with the defeat of chaos, they return to a social structure apparently unchanged politically, economically, and religiously. They have, however, ended the time loop paradox that allowed Garland to live forever and, by extension, had prevented society from progressing beyond its current stage of development. They have changed not only the immediate future, one ironically in which their deeds are unknown, but also any potential future. Players like to believe that the heroes of many of the games are cut from the cloth of revolutionaries. Zidane from Final Fantasy IX is a thief fighting against the upper class, which is represented by the abusive power of Princess Garnet's mother. Vaughn of Final Fantasy XII is a poor orphan resident of Lowtown who, before the quest, can only use his labor either through hunting beasts in the wasteland surrounding Rabanastra or in exchange for other odd jobs to get gil. The character Dahlon best expresses what the player thinks of Vaughn's role in the game world, a champion of the sewers who aspires to noble action. But alas, many of the heroes in the Final Fantasy series, though noble, are not Marxist heroes. Their ultimate goal is to vanquish some badass evildoer, but they often have someone in mind as a replacement, themselves or another feudal lord. Some explanations, however, can be offered. As Marxism sees it, some individuals and groups of individuals may not be ready for a historical change. The societal class has not attained enough class consciousness for the next stage of development. In Final Fantasy II, the four main characters, Firion, Guy, Maria, and Leon, seek to avenge their parents' deaths at the hands of the Emperor of Palamecia. To achieve this end, they join the resistance and eventually overthrow the Emperor. In Final Fantasy IV, we have the Empire of Baron that attacks its neighbors in search of the four crystals. After one of the king's most loyal soldiers, Cecil Harvey, the leader of the Red Wings, begins to question his king, who we find out is being manipulated by the evil Golbez, Harvey seeks out to destroy him. Harvey succeeds, marries, and makes himself king of Baron. However, finally, consider the heroes in Final Fantasy V. The main character Bartz and the three strangers set out to save the crystals that have begun to be shattered by Exdeath in order to release the Void, which will consume the world. The party defeats the Void and saves the world. In all of those games, the assumption is that the new rule will be benevolent and perhaps naively egalitarian. The good guys won, after all. But in the end, has anything really changed? Moogles of the world unite. What about the Moogles? First appearing in Final Fantasy III, they are the true proletarians of the various Final Fantasy worlds. In Final Fantasy IX, Chronicles, and the Final Fantasy III remake, they run a message service. In Final Fantasy XI, I hope that's not massage service. No, massage is an A. Okay, cool. They are essentially vassals or serfs who take care of players' houses, change jobs, and run events. By Final Fantasy XII, they are tradespeople, mechanics, and so forth, while in Final Fantasy IX, they are cartographers, merchants, and so on. It's only in Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 2 that they are active, but even then their fate is not really their own. Players or heroes never consider the plight of the Moogles. Not once do the events that unfold in the game address the simple but natural question, is this the best for the Moogles? Perhaps they are the real strength behind the proletariat, patriots movement, and as a result, I mean, it would make sense they would be watching from the rooftops. They would have to be standing on shoulders, otherwise they're not particularly tall. I guess they could fly around. Anyways. And as a result, should be the ones to begin a revolution. A 19th century Marx might reply, no. Just as every Final Fantasy game is truly set in its own story and world, the same can be said for the ultimate rise of the Moogle proletariat. It truly depends on the game and the unique circumstances surrounding the individual stage of development. Much of the Final Fantasy series is set in feudal political landscapes, even if the trappings of an industrial world are present. It is not until Final Fantasy VI that the societal structure and the social relations more closely resemble the 19th century. The game presents a society that develops technologically following the War of the Magi. But its main character, Tara Branford, a human Esper. Are they going to call them elves? Okay, whatever. The former slave hooks up with the Returners, rebels seeking to overthrow the Empire. Tara battles the Emperor and Kefka, who kills the Emperor and takes control, and eventually the world is rejuvenated due to the release of the magic. The story of Final Fantasy VII is set in a world essentially controlled by the Shinra Electric Power Company. Cloud Strife and a diverse group seek to stop Shinra from sucking away the planet's life. Shinra's power allows it to act as a world government with outposts on the other continents of the world to maintain control. Much of this story surrounds the city of Midgar, the industrial metropolis of Shinra. The upper levels of Midgar, where the upper class lives, are contrasted with the slums below the city, where the vast majority of the laboring class dwells. The slums, Sector 7 in particular, are the home of the resistance led by Avalanche. In the ultimate act of class conflict, Shinra collapses the upper plate of Sector 7, killing the entire population. All of this is backstory, however, to the plan by Sephiroth to use the life stream to be reborn as a god. Cloud is eventually victorious, although it is a mixed victory. While much of the Shinra executive is destroyed and is Sephiroth, or so we would think, Eris loses her life, and most of Midgar is laid to waste, and we learn later in the movie Advent Children that the poor have become desolate and sickness runs rampant as a result of our hero's actions. I mean, kinda. Not entirely. But that's getting into the books. Final Fantasy Interrupted. It is curious and odd that the Marxist conception of history has found no fulfillment in any of the Final Fantasy worlds. I don't think Mark Fisher would find that particularly surprising. While in Final Fantasy VII we have perhaps the closest example of change occurring with the reaction against Shinra, most of the worlds have either rejected industrialization, such as in Final Fantasy X, or are on the precipice of accepting industrialization, such as in Final Fantasy IX, or have only recently re-embraced it, as in Final Fantasy X-2. Marx wrote during a period of rapid and unprecedented change in the Western world, not unlike many of the worlds of Final Fantasy. So why has the Marxist conception of history stalled in these and in our own worlds? Perhaps it is because these societies have not matured to the point where utopian existence is possible. While at the end of Final Fantasy VII, Shinra may be rejected, capitalism as an economic structure persists. In X-2, the readoption of the large-scale industrialization is only in its infancy and only time will tell. If rumors are true, the soon-to-be-released Final Fantasy XIII, oh my gracious, will be set in a futuristic world. Man, I forget this book is old sometimes. So, perhaps the Moogles and other oppressed folk in that world will be ready to embrace, dare I say, the final fantasy. The final fantasy. Oh, Lord. No, didn't they live, I'm not a big fan of 13, but didn't they live in, like, didn't the wealthy, like, live in the sky, and everyone else lived on the barren land with the crazy dinosaurs and shit? I don't remember. You can tell me in the comments, but that was chapter 10 of Final Fantasy and Philosophy. I'm going to name off some more chapters. Let me know in the comments what you would like to hear. We've already done Spiky-Haired Mercenary. We've got Kefka, Nietzsche, and Foucault. Madness and Nihilism in Final Fantasy VI. Judging the Art of Video Games. Hume and the Standard of Taste. The livestream Mako and Gaia I have already done. Gaia and Environmental Ethics in The Spirits Within. The Objectification of Conscious Life Forms in Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy and the Purpose of Life. 4 Warriors of Light save the world, but they don't deserve our thanks. Shinto and Alien Influences in Final Fantasy VII. Sin, Otherworldliness, and the Downside to Hope. Human, All Too Human, Cloud's Existential Quest for Authenticity. Is the Fear of Stopping Justified? What's in a Name? Sid, Cloud, and How Names Refer. So if any of those sound particularly appealing to you, let me know in the comments, and until then, I will see you in the next one.